Many people assumed the British accent was the original, and people changed how they spoke when they got to America. But no, the opposite is true.
No. The Americans did not preserve an original English accent while the British invented a new one. That's a popular story about the English language, but it gets the history completely wrong. The myth goes as follows. The first English colonists went to America with all of their R's intact and preserved them until now. Then, after American independence, wealthy Londoners deliberately started dropping their R's, either in order to sound superior or to differentiate themselves from Americans. That artificial accent eventually became received pronunciation, or RP, and then developed into the posh English accent that we know today. It's a wonderfully tidy story, often repeated online for the last 25 years. It's also complete bollocks, to use the technical term. Like most myths, there's a grain of truth in it. Most early modern English accents were rhotic, in that they pronounced the R's in the spelling even when they came after vowels. In words like cart, hard and first, or cart, hard and first. Most modern North American accents preserve that post-vocalic R, so they're called rhotic, whereas most accents in England don't. But that categorically does not mean that American English somehow stood still while British English was artificially reinvented. Instead, it takes one example of an old feature that American English happens to have retained and completely ignores all the other changes that have happened to the language on both sides of the pond.
The settlers brought with them a snapshot of how English was spoken at the time, in London, Bristol, and what is known as the countryside.
No, the colonists did not bring one variety called just English. There is no point in history where everyone in the British Isles and English colonies spoke with the same accent. The settlers who crossed the Atlantic came from all parts of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and brought with them a great range of regional and social dialects. American English developed out of merges of these dialects, plus contact with indigenous, African and other European languages, as well as changes of its own. That's what happens when new communities form out of diverse linguistic backgrounds. A new variety comes into being, shaving off the rough corners and developing an identity of its own, especially among the kids. English in England has always been magnificently diverse, so there's no way that people from London, Bristol and the countryside spoke the same. Accents change every couple of miles, especially then, but that's still the case in some parts of the country even today. So the question of which variety of modern English is closest to the original is based on a completely false premise. There never was one original. And as for the idea that American English is some kind of fossilized version of Shakespearean, if someone came up to you and said, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lace hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dim." I very much doubt that you'd think they were from Des Moines.
Members of London's upper-class elite did something that had never happened before. They stopped pronouncing R when it wasn't followed by a vowel.
It most certainly had happened before and had been happening for hundreds of years. R dropping was not some new practice invented around the time of the American independence. English had been losing R in particular sound environments for centuries. So the strongest version of the myth is that English speakers had always pronounced every single R that happened to be preserved in the spelling until a bunch of fashionable Londoners got together in the late 18th or early 19th centuries and decided that they weren't going to say them after vowels anymore. But the written record of people who made observations about pronunciation just doesn't support that. One of the early examples, which happened around 1400, was dropping R before the S phoneme. So you get words like Old English arse for bottom being spelt ass. And that's the form that has come to North America. Whereas the spelling that retains the R and the pronunciation of arse in rhotic parts of Great Britain and Ireland is maintained. Bars, the fish, became bass. Curse became cuss and stayed curse. Burst became bust and stayed burst. Palsy became palsy. Spelling mistakes are a good indication of how people actually pronounce things. And again, from the 1400s, we have examples of people spelling parcel without the R.
As London grew into the largest and most powerful city on earth, its wealthiest residents needed a way to stand out from the rhotic commoners around them and the newly independent Americans. In addition to huge houses, stunning jewels, and fashionable apparel, they chose to change the way they said words containing R.
There's no evidence to suggest that London's elite cultivated R-lessness in order to distinguish themselves from common people or Americans. Witnesses at the time describe a gradual process, not some politically motivated conspiracy. By the 18th century, observers were discussing the weakening and loss of R in England, and they didn't necessarily approve. In 1791, pronunciation writer John Walker complained that R was too feebly sounded in England, particularly in London, where it is sometimes entirely sunk. So that's a witness from the time describing what was going on. But what he doesn't say is that the upper classes are kind of banding together to annoy Americans. Indeed, most people in the 1790s in Britain had never met an American and would have had no idea what one sounded like. The social judgment around this is really revealing. Like many sound changes, people started saying it was careless, lazy, vulgar. It's what sociolinguistics describe as a change from below. Ordinary people start saying something that most people don't really notice. It's only later that the upper classes catch on and sometimes imitate the change. Even much later, once people had accepted that non-rhoticity was the norm, people like the poet Keats were criticised for rhyming words with R's and words without them. Couldst thou wish for lineage higher than twin sister of Thalia? Most offensive, not indeed to the ear, but to the mind. So this was a kind of halfway stage where people, accepted things with their ears, but not necessarily with their eyes or with their ideas about the primacy of spelling.
By the Victorian era, this pompous, R-less way of speaking got a name, RP, or received pronunciation. It was spread through England's exclusive system of private schools, the public schools.
Well, RP may not have been named or codified, but that doesn't mean that its features had not come together naturally from real speech. This clip condenses the whole history of an accent into the much later history of its label. Received pronunciation was not an accent cobbled together out of spare parts. Instead, it developed naturally out of a tight-knit social network around the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, the prestigious public schools, and the elites of southeastern England, especially London. Originally, pupils at the public schools would have arrived with all different accents. But living and working and studying together meant that they developed a common accent. And add to that the additional incentive of not wanting to be bullied for sounding different to everyone else. Defined social groups do this all the time. And not just aristocrats. Surfer dudes, valley girls, and defined youth cultures all develop particular ways of speaking. Nobody has to sit down and make them up. They just emerge. People spend time together, identify with each other, and gradually begin to sound alike. It's even happened recently in Antarctica. Daniel Jones, who coined the expression RP, or received pronunciation, didn't invent it, he was just describing it in 1926, not 1776.
While the radio networks in the US standardized a rhotic Midwestern accent, the BBC promoted RP as the way to speak.
The reason it was used by the BBC is that most of the people involved in the BBC had come up through that public school, Oxford and Cambridge route. It was the most natural choice. Later they actually codified it and said this is how you have to talk on the radio. But originally it wasn't some kind of imposition.
In some U.S. coastal cities, those which maintained the closest trade routes with the old country, the well-to-do started to ape the hoity-toity limey lingo from across the pond.
And Boston Arla's speech was not just a copy of posh London. Just like in England, the history of Arlessness in North America is much more complicated. Non-rhotic accents were not just a 19th century import. We can actually see, again from spelling mistakes, how people might have been speaking in the 1600s. Sometimes leaving out R's where they should be in the spelling, and sometimes putting them in where there never was one. And that's quite a common thing to do. If you're self-conscious about whether you're pronouncing things right, you say things or spell things how you think posh people or educated people might say them. As I've highlighted in detail in one of my previous videos, prestige pronunciations before the Second World War were non-rhotic, including in broadcasting.
CA Magic Key turned for the first time in a radio presentation, bringing to you from many corners of the world such well-known friends as Maria Jeritzer, singing from Vienna and accompanied by the Vienna Symphony Orchestra.
The United States became much more confident in itself after the war. So the prestige accent shifted from the coastal elites to a more down-at-home accent based in the Midwest. And that's where the network standard general American came from. As the prestige accent shifted towards rhoticity, non-rhotic accents in Boston, New York and the South suddenly became labelled as working class or rural. The father of sociolinguistics, William Labov, did a famous experiment in department stores in New York. He went to different stores catering to different social groups and found that as the shop got posher, so did the level of rhoticity of the staff. Famously, he would ask for something that was on the fourth floor and then pretend not to have heard. Posh places said fourth floor on both occasions, whereas the more down-market establishments stuck with fourth floor. In England, the story is reversed. Originally condemned as lazy and vulgar, Rlessness then became part of the prestige accent. People who persisted in pronouncing R's after vowels were then stigmatised as sounding rural, and no one wanted to sound like a farmer. This means that rhoticity has lost a great deal of its ground in England, although of course it's thriving alive and well in Scotland and Ireland.
You might expect the biggest linguistic changes to have happened in the new colonies. The most dramatic change was in the UK, not the US.
So no, British English did not change while America stood still. Yes, American accents might have preserved R after vowels, but that's just one feature. Here are some examples of other things that changed in America, but not in Britain. In much of North America, T and D between a stressed and unstressed vowel become a tap sound. So that's why ladder and ladder, rider and rider sound the same in many North American accents, but not all. And the consonant in water can sound like a D to British listeners. And that is not Shakespeare preserved in aspic. North American accents have merged the vowel in lot with the one in calm in the so-called bother-father merger, where bother and father end up with the same vowel. There's a wonderful phenomenon called yod dropping, whereby British accents tend to have news, tune and student, whereas North American has news, tune and student. A wonderful combination of those last two features is the word tutor, which can mean someone who toots, someone who teaches you, or Henry VIII's last name. And lots of changes are ongoing. In many parts of the South, the distinction between pin and pen has been lost. In vast swathes of the continent, there's no longer a distinction between Dawn, the woman's name, and Don, the man's name.
Noah Webster, a school educationator and lexicon grappler, decided that the new country needed a new linguistic identity, something that no country had ever tried before except those that had. He simplified spellings, such as color for color and theater for theater.
Well, Noah Webster didn't do it all on his own. Spellings like colour and theatre were actually common in Britain at the same time. It's just he standardised one and the British standardised another a bit later. He did want to make it clear that American English was a separate thing and to give it its own identity, and he succeeded in that. Some of his other suggested spellings didn't really meet with the same level of success. It just goes to show you can publish a dictionary, but the real proof of the pudding is whether actual speakers and users use what you've suggested.
So the people of England changed the way they spoke, much more than those who had moved to North America. But they did it after, which is not before, the American Revolution.
So no, British elites did not develop a new R-less accent because America had become independent. R-lessness was already developing and its association with prestige came later. Did British English change after the settlement of North America? Of course it did. Did American English preserve an R pattern across most of the continent? Yes. Did Americans preserve the original English? No, because there wasn't an original to begin with, and American English started to innovate as soon as people got off the boat. The real history is much better. English already had a wonderful variety of accents. R-loss was a gradual process attested centuries before RP. Non-rhoticity spread gradually and was initially stigmatised before it became part of the prestige dialect. R-lessness became a feature of RP because RP developed organically in parts of the country where people had been dropping their R's for a long time. Coastal North American communities developed non-rhotic varieties of their own, some of which were prestigious until attitudes towards rhoticity changed after the Second World War. Meanwhile, every variety on both sides of the Atlantic, and in South Africa and India and Australia and New Zealand, continued changing to this day. American English is not a linguistic time capsule. British English is not some costume created in 1776. They're two branches of a very diverse language, each preserving some old features and each innovating in its own special way, without needing any permission from aristocrats, dictionary writers, or YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.